Today on Locked On Red Wings, now that David Perron has changed sides over to the Ottawa Senators, who's going to wear his A?
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. Scotty's also the host over at Locked On Tigers, so give him a listen, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Still searching for a great candidate for your company? Don't search, just match with Indeed. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Also want to thank you guys for making Indeed, you do. Also want to thank you guys for making Locked On Red Wings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Scotty, we did this episode actually, back in April after the season ended. It was kind of a hypothetical. If David Perron and Patrick Kane leave, who is your candidate to replace David Perron's letter? Well, now David Perron has left. Patrick Kane has stayed, and they, along the way, picked up Vladimir Tarasenko. So there's a lot of guys on this Red Wings roster who have worn letters with other organizations in the past who could fill that hole, as well as a couple really exciting young players who could step up and fill that role for a long time. So I thought it's a good idea here in the middle of July to kind of rehash that conversation and see if, our thoughts are the same or if our thoughts have changed at all now that Perron has definitely left and that A that he was wearing is now available. So, Scotty, I guess the only question for you is, who is your first candidate you would have in mind to wear that A?
So I have it narrowed down to two players that I think are the most likely, and between the two of them, I guess I could kind of hear arguments. There's pros and cons, I think, to both. I really do think that Seider is going to be in heavy consideration here, and he's, I guess, who we'll start with. And one of the biggest reasons why I think he would get it is because of the long-term, not ramifications, but the long-term outlook of the Detroit Red Wings, right? This is a guy that you are planning to extend for, 7, 8 years, if you can, hopefully, before the season starts. That's been something we're still waiting on. Please help us out with content, Steve Yzerman. I know that's high in your priority list, but I think that is really a slam dunk candidate there. I know that there's a lot of conversations. Raymond is in that, similar boat. I do think that having someone wear it, I guess the other A is probably going to be on the blue line too. But I think just having your number one defenseman who is going to be here for presumably the next, if everything goes to plan, decade plus, wearing that letter is a really, really easy candidate to start with. If you want to riff about Mo for a second before I throw the other one out there, we can do that. But I think that he's one of two that I think are toward the top of my list.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely he, and I think we're probably on the same page of who the other main candidate would be. Seider seems like he'd be the guy, right? You obviously, if Ben Chirot is on your top pair, you have a top pair defenseman with the letter A on his jersey, but Moritz Seider presumably is going to be here for up to 8 years with this new contract getting signed. And if it's less than that, I imagine they're not going to buy UFA years quite yet. So maybe even more than 8 years if they decide on a bridge deal. This guy was the first draft pick that Steve Yzerman chose in his first draft in 2019. They took him 6th overall. He won the Calder. He's taken on more and more responsibility every single year he's been with the Detroit Red Wings. He was their top pair D-man this year. He had the toughest minutes in the league. He's a guy who everyone talks so highly about when they do talk about him in the locker room. His attitude, we saw his rookie season. Obviously, he's super jovial. He talked a lot about, playing the game for the love of the game, things of that nature. But you see on the ice too, switch gets turned off on the ice. He becomes the mean defenseman that the Red Wings need back there. And of course, not to shortchange his ability as a skater either, right? Like, solid two-way D-man. He's going to be the number one defenseman for this team for so long to come. And I think that the leadership aspects of his game have really come a long way too. Obviously, we're not in the locker room, but from the little tidbits of interviews we get to see with him, he takes media availability very serious. He's not afraid of talking to the media as well. Like, this is a guy who I literally cannot think of one strike against him, personality or player-wise, as to the reason why he could not wear the A.
What's a bad reason? What's a, if you're making a list of pros and cons of reasons to give it to everybody, is there a single one that goes against Seider other than maybe someone else is just quote unquote more deserving? Like, that's really the only, and that's the only knock against him, is like, you have one of the greatest, hockey players ever play on your team too. And like, maybe it makes more sense to give it to him. Like, that's literally the only kind of counter argument to Mo.
Correct. And I don't even know if more deserving is the right word to use, because I think Seider is, you just said it, he's one of your top two, you narrowed it down. He's one of the most deserving players on the team, also, in my
giving
eyes.
It to a core member, right?
Like, core member.
Kane is fantastic, and obviously he's one of the greatest players to ever step on
the ice. Is that who you were talking about?
What?
Is that who you were talking about?
Yeah.
Patrick Kane? Well, we didn't say his name, so I wasn't sure. It was still up in the air, dude.
Ridiculous. So, so ridiculous. But so like, obviously you have Kane, who wore it for a game, right? Just the one game, just the Blackhawks game.
Yes.
Last season, and everybody looks up to him. Mo looks up to Patrick Kane. Like, he has admitted that, and he says he picks his brain and talks to him about hockey and whatnot. Like, so it's very, very, very easy to do that. I don't think anyone would really have a problem if they gave an A to Patrick Kane either, right? Like, if that ended up happening, I'm not sure the fan base would be upset. It's just there's something about giving it to a core piece. When you look at the NHL core of players that, okay, who are we building around? Who is going to be here for the next 8+ years that we're hoping to win a cup with? Obviously, I hope we win a cup next season. But like, if we're looking at the long term, who are we building around, right? It's Larkin, who already has a C, and that's painfully obvious. And then you have the conversation of Raymond and Seider and a few other guys. So like, giving it to someone who is, we're not going to have to find someone new to give the A to next year, the year after, and whatever. Like, this is going to be our alternate for the next, again, 8 to 10 to longer years. There is something really intriguing about that too.
I think that's the biggest reason why you do it, is because you're going to give it to the core member of your team, the centerpiece of your defense for this iteration of the Detroit Red Wings. I think that's the biggest reason. And you asked, like, what are the cons? I don't think there's anything substantial that you could say as a he's too young. I don't think so. They gave him the A in the preseason at times last year as well. Like, so with that in mind, like, this is clearly a guy that they're fostering a leadership role for. Like, I don't want to make too much about getting a letter in preseason, but so it doesn't mean much, but it also doesn't mean nothing, right? Like, there are a lot of other players on that roster who have been with the Red Wings who didn't wear letters during preseason, right? So, like, this is a guy I clearly see as somebody that they're trying to foster a leadership role for, and somebody who I see as embracing a leadership role. So it's really all just comes down. Here's the bottom line, Scotty. Moritz Seider is going to wear an A for the Detroit Red Wings at some point in his tenure here. The question then becomes, is when? Is it this year, or do you put it off for another year or two to let him grow in that role? Right. That's really what it comes down to. He's going to wear one. Is it yet? Is it now? That's it.
That is the question.
So with that being said, we can talk a little bit more about Patrick Kane in the second half, because obviously that was the second name that you had. He was probably the name I would have led with and then gone to Seider in reverse. So maybe, I don't know who your number one versus your number two is. We'll see. So I guess we'll have that discussion. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Stay tuned.
Let's call the T's in the biz.
Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings, coming up. Got to talk to you guys today about Indeed. We are driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to recent Indeed surveys. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly searching and learning for your preferences. So the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on the podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Indeed, you do.
In the background, I love it.
Segment from backstage, still getting the line in there.
Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Scotty, Patrick Kane's obviously another leading candidate for the A with the Detroit Red Wings, as you previously noted. He wore it against the Chicago Blackhawks in Chicago. Obviously, there's a little bit more going on there. It was his return to Chicago where he won 3 Stanley Cups. He's a future Hall of Famer. It was Chris Chelios' retirement jersey. And I think everything was just perfect. You couldn't not give him the letter. And Derek Lalonde has a little bit of a history of doing that with players in their return to quote-unquote a hometown, right? Like they did that with Michael Rasmussen when they returned to his hometown. Obviously, Patrick Kane's not from Chicago, but he might as well be at this point in his career. But I don't think that lessens also his justification for him wearing the letter. He wore the A for 8 years with the Chicago Blackhawks, Scotty. And as previously mentioned just 30 seconds ago, he has all kinds of accolades under his belt across his career. Like, I think just as much as it's a slam dunk to give Seider the A because he's a cornerstone piece of your franchise, a centerpiece of this franchise going forward, it makes just as much sense to give Patrick Kane, who was a team leader on a very successful franchise, who players on this franchise, on this roster, already look up to, the A, even if it's just for 1 year.
Yeah, this is another, slam dunk option here, and I really do think that these are the two very clear clubhouse leaders for this. Now, obviously, we'll see how camp and preseason, et cetera, all play out. But this is a guy that not only is he just, again, one of the best players to ever play in the NHL, but just kind of in general, you heard so much last season about the younger players on the team looking up to Kane. You even heard Dylan Larkin, who is the captain and in his prime years, right? He's not, in his early 20s anymore, is in his prime years there, even talk about what Kane provides and whatnot to the locker room. And I think that there is an argument, especially on a 1-year deal, for okay, we're going to give it to Kane until Kane is no longer a Red Wing, and that's when it's Seider's turn type of thing, right? I think that there is a really legitimate argument for that conversation. It's just on the ice, and again, clearly off the ice too, based on everything that these players have said. Just it really is another very easy candidate to look at.
Yeah, I mean, he, again, 3-time Cup winner. He won the Calder Trophy. He's been an All-Rookie, 4-time All-Star. He won the Conn Smythe in the Stanley Cup in 2013. I don't want to talk about those playoffs. That was one of the most painful eliminations I've ever seen as a Red Wings fan. The 15-16 Ross. He's won a Pearson Trophy. He's won the 2015-2016 Hart Trophy. This guy has done it all on the ice, and inside the locker room, his teammates seem to really respect him and look up to him. You mentioned Dylan Larkin, but also Lucas Raymond, right? Lucas Raymond, they've asked about having Patrick Kane as an influence in the locker room. He said that He's learned so much from Patrick Kane that his presence is a huge help. And I do think that another full season of that is going to be super helpful. And if he is as much of a leader as we've heard about from the media availabilities from the Detroit Red Wings, then why wouldn't you give him the yay? The only way he wouldn't get the yay at that point would be like, does he just not, want to be that role anymore at this point in his career? Like, that would be the only way he wouldn't get it if that was the direction the Red Wings decided to go with a vet, an older locker room leader, rather than go with a younger voice that's going to be part of your team for the foreseeable future. Because if he's already doing everything an assistant captain or an alternate captain would do, why would you just not give him the letter then? Like, it does, it just makes too much sense. For a very different reason why Moritz Seider makes too much sense. It makes too much sense for Patrick Kane as well. With that being said, I mean, I don't think I have anything else I can say about Patrick Kane. I think it's all, you guys all know it's all out there with him. Like, that's just the situation.
For sure. And I think that leads to kind of the last leg of this, is if there's anybody else that is on the radar. I think if you ask most people in the fan base, those are going to be the clear top two options. Again, like there's probably an opening for Tarasenko. You said it earlier, like Rasmussen wore it for a game, a couple of games for like a home reunion type of thing. That's probably not as likely, certainly not as likely as the two guys we brought up earlier. I'm wondering if there is anybody else that's on the table, because it just feels to me like the two clear choices at the top are like pretty clearly the two choices at the top.
Well, and I like those two names you brought up, because I think there's a conversation there, but I don't want to, and I want to get back to that, but I think that there's a name we should talk about, even if, and I think it's a very good name as well, even if it's not as in the same tier as Seider and Kane for us, and that's Lucas Raymond. Like, that's a very notable name. It's a cornerstone piece of your team going forward, and there's a lot of fans who think that he should wear the A for the Detroit Red Wings, especially after what happened with the Detroit Red Wings this last year, and he was like the driving force for the Wings in the last couple weeks of the season. He was their points leader. Like, he broke out of his shell on the ice. He was absolutely stellar. And I do think that with Lucas Raymond, it's another situation where it's a matter of win. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I think Lucas Raymond will wear a letter with the Detroit Red Wings at some point, but he's just not a leading candidate like Seider and Kane is for me. I think that he's maybe a couple more contracts expiring later.
Right. Well, and again, to your point, like I feel like everyone kind of sees the writing on the wall of, okay, long term, it's going to be Larkin, at wearing the C, and then those two rocking A's. Like, I feel like that's kind of the long term outlook, and it's I don't want to say like fairly obvious necessarily, but it's fairly obvious. Like, I think that's, barring a massive roster shakeup, that's probably what you're looking at going forward. So yeah, man, like I think it's just for him, for like this upcoming season, it's harder for me to see them go with him over Mo
Seider or Kane.
And Kane, right? Like that's just those are two guys that, as we said earlier, like there's really no negatives, and there's not really a ton with Raymond either. Like I
don't know of any negatives with Raymond.
Right, we're really splitting hairs here, but I do think that's just two really kind of leading candidates that he would have to get over. And it's not impossible either, though, right? Like, just because he's third on our list doesn't mean that it's like impossible for him to do. I just think that's more of a, once Kane is gone, that's going to free up that a lot more, and just, I don't know, like a year or two away kind of thing for him. But that's definitely not impossible that we roll into, September and he's out there rocking it. I don't think that would be shocking.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, part of this is where we're coming from an area of a lot of like vibes. Obviously, like Kane, there's a huge track record, but when you're going with like a young cornerstone piece, Seider and Raymond are both cornerstone pieces of your offense and defense respectively for years to come. And maybe the reason we're so confident it would be Seider over Raymond is we skew more Seider fans than Raymond fans. Not that we're not Raymond fans. We're huge Lucas Raymond fans, and he's going to get his bag deservedly so. You would not we were screaming Lucas Raymond's name from the rooftops. But I've played defense growing up, so maybe I'm so much more confident it would be Seider over Raymond, just simply because I'm biased towards Seider. I think the end of the day, it's splitting hairs, as you put it. It's splitting hairs, and just being a little, having a little bit of our bias and vibes poke through here when we're talking about candidates that are so deserving, like Seider, Raymond, and Patrick Kane. I think Patrick Kane has the most physical accolades to back that argument up, But with Seider and Raymond, it's just about like, who do you think's more ready?
Right, and I think when we talk about most likely to happen, I really think that I mean, we can get to it after the break, I guess, kind of like what our final predictions are. But I think again, there's a reason why the younger guys are probably a half a step down. I would be pretty surprised. I guess I'm just going to spoil it. I would be pretty surprised if Kane wasn't wearing an A this fall.
Yeah, I think Kane's probably the easiest candidate to predict, but also if they decided to go Seider or Raymond instead, I would be like, okay, I get that cornerstone.
Thrilled. I might even like that more.
Right.
Like, to be honest, I might actually like it more if one of them got it. I'm just expecting Kane to get it.
Yeah, and Kane's only on a 1-year deal as well, so it's like you put off giving those guys letters in a shortest term, theory, 1 year. So it just seems like it makes the most boxes are checked with Patrick Kane for the short term, unless they decide to go long term. Anyways, we got to go ahead to a break. When we come back, we'll talk about dark horse candidates. Stay tuned. Segment 3 of Locked On Red Wings. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Scotty, a couple of dark horse candidates. You mentioned one, Vladimir Tarasenko. We can talk about him first. Vladimir Tarasenko wore the A with the St. Louis Blues for 6 seasons. In one of those seasons, they won the Stanley Cup, the 2019 season, very famous now as the team was in last place in the league in January, and then roared back to make the playoffs and inevitably win the Stanley Cup. They think they played the Bruins that year in the Cup final. Not that it matters, just trying to remember. So my question for you is, does Vladimir Tarasenko, I guess, let me phrase it this way. Does he have a shot to come in and push his way immediately to the top of the hierarchy on who gets that last A?
I mean, nothing's impossible, but I would say it's extremely unlikely. Just because, again, like this team, and it's not, nothing of his fault. It's just this team played together last year and went through the ups and downs and the tying a playoff team and missing the postseason, all of that. Like this team was just all here last year and has all played together, and he's the new guy. That's really all there is to it in my eyes. Maybe a year from now we're having this conversation again, as we seem to every offseason, and we're talking about, Kane leaves. Is it going to be Vlad's letter now? I mean, that's very possible. I think. Again, when we talk about building a team and like the core type of players, and not that Kane is necessarily like long-term core, like to the same level that Seider and Raymond are. Like he's still a fixture in your top 6 that was here last year and was a really important part to your team last season, and already has the relationships, et cetera, with all the players. So I would say that it's pretty unlikely, but I guess nothing's impossible, especially for a player of his caliber.
Yeah, and I'll say this too. Like if Kane got it this year and Kane left next offseason, we're revisiting this conversation, I would then put Seider and Raymond pretty clearly above Tarasenko again, barring like an insanely great season from Vladimir Tarasenko. I think at this point in their careers and where the Red Wings organization is headed, I mean, again, it's just a question of when with Seider and Raymond, not if. And I right now, Kane is the only one on this roster who I feel personally, again, going off some vibes because we're not in the locker room, but I feel personally is more deserving than Seider and Raymond, and that's just because of Hockey Hall of Fame status, pending Hockey Hall of Fame status, and all the championships and accolades that he has across his career, and how well he's already looked up to in the locker room. Another guy is Michael Rasmussen. He did wear the A at one point during the season in his return home. I think that was Vancouver, right? Vancouver. Again, it's the same conversation we had with Patrick Kane about that, right? Like, that was Derek Lalonde doing a little bit of a favor, but also he's not going to do that for just anybody, right? You're not going to just give the A to anybody in their return home. You have to also have a little bit of that leadership qualities, and I can see it, again, going off of just what I feel I've seen watching this team, right? Because we're not in the locker room. I feel like Michael Rasmussen has the leadership mentality. He's a very serious player from what I can tell. I've never seen, he and Andrew Kopp are two players I feel like I never see celebrate goals. Just always, they look like the killer in the eyes. They look like they're going to kill somebody.
Andrew Kopp has some hilarious post-goal quotes, let me tell you.
Oh, yeah. So I do wonder about Michael Rasmussen as well as being a guy who's, been around the block with the Red Wings, dating all the way back to when they were really bad. But I think his role on the ice is going to significantly hamper any strong candidacy he may have to wear the A, because now he's finding himself continually getting pushed down the depth chart to a role now where he's third or fourth line. And not that that's not possible. Luke Glendening wore the A for this team as well at one point. So it is possible.
King. Bring back my dog, man.
But I just think with where this organization is headed, he is seriously a dark horse candidate toward the A.
Yeah. I think, and again, like they do the switcheroo type of thing. I don't know, man. I think that you are just getting more and more, which is good because that's a sign that the team is getting better and the core is growing, but you're just getting like more and more, way more obvious candidates and more justifiable players to rock it, right? Like when Kopp was signed, we even talked about, we were like, yeah, he might wear the A, right? Like that's not too far out of the realm of possibility here. And then obviously he ended up doing that. Like I just think the organization is in such a better place than it was when Kopp put pen to paper, and that's a good thing. That means the team is growing. It's also somewhat of an indictment of a disappointing first 2 years from Copper, but like I feel like there are much better, for a lot of reasons, candidates to do that than him. But also, to your point, the overarching theme of this entire conversation is we're also not in the locker rooms, and so maybe Andrew Kopp is the most important leader in the entire organization, and we just don't know it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another guy too. We've been going down the depth chart, so to speak, on guys we think are likely. Let's go a little bit up the depth chart. Someone we haven't noted as of yet, but I would think Alex DeBrincat is pretty high on that list as well. I would still slot him behind Raymond, but probably above Vladimir Tarasenko for leadership material on this team. He'll be going into his second full season with the Detroit Red Wings. He wore the A for a couple years with the Chicago Blackhawks as well in 2020 and 2021. So those two COVID years. But prior to being dealt, he was an assistant captain along with Patrick Kane on the Chicago Blackhawks. So I think that there is he's far stronger of a candidate than Tarasenko and Michael Rasmussen with the Detroit Red Wings. But at the same time, that's again just going off feel and the history of these players. They could go completely off the board. What if it's Oli Mata?
Right. Yeah. Hey.
So, but yeah, I think DeBrincat is worth mentioning as well because he's he's going to be a top 6'4". He's going to score 60 to 70 points, and those are the type of guys that tend to, typically, again, Luke Glendening has worn the A, Justin Abdelkader has worn the A, but typically it's your highest productive players that end up being your leaders.
For sure. And again, we're just going to start talking in circles at this point, but like I feel like there are some clear top two candidates and everybody else is or top three. We can throw Raymond in there too. Candidates and everybody else is, as you said, kind of a long shot.
Yeah, I have one more name for you.
I can't wait for this. Christian Fischer. Bang. Do it.
Honestly, actually, I would love that.
Do it.
We are so biased towards Christian Fischer, as we should be.
I have no bias at all. He's the greatest player of all time. I have no bias at all, though.
So I love that. I was going to say Jeff Petrie.
Thanks for making Locked On Red Wings your first listen.
He wore the A for 3 years with the Montreal Canadiens, the same Montreal Canadiens team that made the Stanley Cup final in the bubble year. So I'm just saying, there's a track record of leadership out of Petrie. Just saying. He'll probably still be your second pair right side D. But again, I'm not making the argument over Seider or Kane or anybody. But when we're talking dark horse candidates, I think he could throw his name in the mix.
Okay, you do that.
I just did.
Good for you.
So, where do we go from here?
I think we end the show.
Should we?
I think so.
You haven't complimented me on my new hat yet.
You know, I actually was like in my brain for real. I had like, oh, I'm going to start off the show by saying nice hat. And then I got distracted clearly by your beautiful words. And it just slipped out of my head.
See, I know that's a blatant lie, but appreciate the sentiment nonetheless. All right, Scotty. Tomorrow we'll be back. We'll be doing some talking. We're back on our normal schedule. Sorry that there was no Monday or Tuesday episode. As you can tell, I was in Seattle for a wedding.
I'm not home.
So we were both traveling.
We were both in airplanes going to different places in the country on Monday.
We both were in the Detroit airport, just at very different times of day. You left in the morning, and I came back late at night.
Very
So, final thoughts, Scotty.
We ball, baby.
We do ball. We'll be back with a new episode tomorrow. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.
Every day.